Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, extra in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Another guest, a local guest, and another major airline captain joins the show. He's been here before. His name's Charlie Venema. Welcome to the show, Charlie.
Hey, good morning, Bobby.
So Charlie is a friend of the flight school and someone who is a major airline captain here in the Houston area. And he also does another big job, works for his own company called CheckedAndSet.net. And he is helping future pilots become professional pilots at the major airlines. I think Charlie came in and talked to our CFIs a couple safety meetings ago, and we welcome you back, Charlie, and we look forward to having this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Bobby. Glad to be here.
So Charlie worked in the training department for a major airline for 14 years and ran the recruiting department for 3 full years, and is obviously responsible for hiring hundreds of mainline pilots for a major airline. And today helps many of us, no matter where we're at in our career, go from probably a cargo job, a regional job, or something else to one of the major airlines, specializing in airline apps and resumes, from what I understand. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So Charlie's here today, hopefully to answer most of your questions if you're listening. But we have worked with Charlie, and we've got a few topics we want to cover today. So let's start right off with people come in here all the time, Charlie. They say they want to be a professional pilot, right?
Right.
And I always say, well, we can help you get there. But being a professional pilot means a lot of different things. We've interviewed the chief pilot for Goodyear Blimps. He probably has a little different path than most of your clientele. But what do you, when you meet someone maybe at the swim team or out and about, and they say, Charlie, I want to be a professional pilot, what does that mean to you? How do you answer that question? What do you tell them they should be doing to start that career path?
Well, you got to start somewhere, right? And a lot of it depends. When I'm having a conversation, are you 18 or are you 35? Are you 45 or 50?
Yep.
Right? Because your paths and your options are different depending on where you are in life. And professional pilot, there's a lot of different outcomes for that too, right? So professional pilot, am I going to be a professional corporate pilot? Am I going to be a professional airline pilot? Am I going to go fly helicopters?
Yeah, and I think so, because we can't answer every one of those. Let's break it down to probably 2 groups, all wanting to be an airline pilot. I mean, I think that while some get close and don't quite get there, that's probably the dream of Johnny or Sue when they come in to talk to me about flight training, of course, right?
Right.
So let's assume they want to go to one of the majors at some point in their future. That means they got to get their first certificate, obviously. But let's assume there's 2 age classes there: the high school graduate and then the career changer. I think we most often talk about those 2 categories. So
right.
I'm 18 years old. I just graduated from high school. College does not seem like the route for me to be a veterinarian, a dentist. I don't know what I want to be. I want to be a pilot. I've always kind of been looking up. Well, what's the, I guess, advice or thought process that you have towards that young man or woman that's just graduated high school?
Find a path, right? And the nice thing with the airlines now is they are helping people identify pathways. And you'll even hear that word used, a career pathway. All of it, of course, has to include flight training, and it almost always includes college. And the college can come in lots of different forms and fashions, but it's always, in my opinion, needs to be in that mix.
That's a good segue. I think we're going to talk about some of them in a little bit, but does it have to be an aviation college degree? I get that question all the time.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
It does not. So the flight training should be structured. And when an airline recruiter looks at a pilot's background, where they learn to fly is a component of that. And so coming through a flight school that's Part 141, for example, versus learning to fly that your neighbor taught you to fly in a J3 in a cow pasture in Iowa, the Part 141 training program is going to be recognized as a defined program with clear objectives and benchmarks. The other part of that becomes the college aspect, right?
And we're not talking associate's degree here. We're talking 4-year degree.
Well, we can take it in stepping stones,
Okay.
right? So you don't have to go out with the 4-year degree. I think the 4-year degree should be the prize, but I think it makes sense to take it into sections. If you're not going to do a 4-year traditional like an Embry-Riddle program, or there's lots of other schools, if you were going to do it locally, I would consider looking to complete the associate degree thing first and then move to the bachelor's degree. And here's why. On a major airline application, almost every company will tell you that a bachelor's degree is preferred. For some, it's required. Delta Airlines, for example, if you don't have a 4-year degree, they're not even going to bring you in the door. But for those companies where a degree is preferred and not required, there are drop-down boxes. And one of the drop-down boxes is an associate degree. And then there's a bachelor's degree, and then you got a master's and a PhD. Getting from the high school / GED box to the associate degree box adds value. Getting from the associate degree box to the bachelor's degree box adds value. So I think you can certainly go and enroll in any particular program with the objective of getting the bachelor's degree. And I wouldn't stop when I got the associate degree, but I think an associate degree is a logical hurdle. It's a feel-good moment. It's a pat yourself on the back moment. You've got something, and it has tangible value in the hiring environment, but then keep going to the next level.
And I did the same thing at corporate America. I mean, I got my associate's and then went to a degree program, which does exist for aviation. If you have an associate's degree, it's a little quicker, easier, different online programs to get that final merit badge of the bachelor's degree.
Right.
Now let's take that 18-year-old person. We talked through that. Now I'm a career changer. I'm 35. No longer want to be an accountant. I have an associate's degree, maybe in math or something. I've had a good 10 or 15-year run in my career, but I'm changing careers. And I want to be a professional pilot. What do you think or say to that person if you meet them on the street about where to go next? It's still flight training, I assume.
It has to be, right? You got to get your ratings, you got to get your certificate, but then you got to get flight time, right? Because it's not about not only having the ratings, okay, but now I've got my ATP, right? Because that's a pinnacle, because you can't do anything until you meet, well, let's recant that, restricted ATP minimums, right? So because the first step would probably be go into a regional airline, because a United, a Delta, American, Southwest, FedEx, UPS isn't going to pick up a pilot that doesn't have their ATP yet. And typically competitive hours for those companies, for civilian guys, is anywhere between 4,000 to 5,000 hours of total time. So that's downrange from what we're talking about today. I got to get that pilot to that point.
And you said restricted ATP. I think we've talked about it on the show before. What are the requirements to get to where you're qualified for a restricted ATP? 1,000 hours is the number. But a number of these degree programs help you get there, right? With 1,000 hours, you have to have a 4-year degree for eligibility to for a restricted ATP. You 1,500 hours for ATP if you don't have the 4-year degree.
And that's a big difference.
Those could culminate to help in many ways, and we know it. We've said it. We'll talk more about it today. Seniority is king. So 500 hours of flight time takes almost a year to get in most cases. You're a year ahead of your competition if you knock that 4-year degree out. Whether you're 35 or 18, I think the story's pretty much the same. Flight training, some culmination thereof, some college culmination thereof, and then flight time to get to my number of hours that I need to even be considered to fill out an application or provide a resume to a regional airline.
Correct.
Now, there's some other routes, cargo, pipeline flying, all these other ways to get these hours. Wally and I talk about it all the time. The best way to get there is being a flight instructor.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. And let me rationalize it. Let's say, well, just carte blanche. Almost every airline out there believes that guys who have been instructors make better students. So let's make a baseline assumption that an airline subscribes to that theory. And that's a safe assumption.
And that's such you've said that before, and I've heard you say it to me. You're not saying that airlines think a flight instructor makes a better pilot.
No, they
make a better student. You just said that they make a better student. So when I get a job at the airlines, the key is to be a great student, is what I'm hearing you say, because that's really what you're doing when you get that first job.
Absolutely.
Okay. I just, as an outsider, not in this world for more than a few years now, I pick up on that. That's a very interesting way to have that dialogue. Not that they're better pilots, they're better students, and we can make them what we want them to be and how they should fly the aircraft, which means my company culture, my company way. That's very interesting.
And that's a great way to encapsulate it. An airline is going to, you have the fundamental skills. Pull back houses get smaller, push back houses get bigger again. What an airline wants to do is they want to, and it's actually called basic indoctrination training, right? They want to indoctrinate you into how that airline operates, how they operate the airframes, what the culture of the company is, how they engage with their pilots and with their flight attendants and with their customers. So being able to be a good student is a critical component of that. Because if you have the functional capacity to learn, well, then that's half my battle. But if I can't, you can't teach someone how to learn. So if you've got that skill when you come in, then we're miles ahead. So with your CFI, if I've got two pilots and I'm making a hiring decision, I've got two resumes sitting on my desk, and everything is the same except one pilot has been an instructor and not just has the ratings, has done the job. There's a fundamental difference there too, right? Okay, you have the certificate, fantastic, but have you done the mission?
1,000 hours of dual given.
Right. That's an easy choice. The person who's been an instructor will get an interview before the person who hasn't.
Wally, you've obviously flown with a lot of first officers and have been a check airman in many different capacities, I'm sure, different airframes, etc. You've said it many times on the show. The flight instructor makes the better pilot, I think. We've talked about that. But hearing him say students, very interesting. What has your experience been flying with those first officers that have come up through the ranks, maybe been an instructor at a regional? Does that hold true to you?
Well, I think what Charlie has said about a better student, that this is an aha moment for me. I mean, a light bulb just went off in my head. I have said over and over and over again that I believe CFIs make better pilots, and I'm gonna change what I say, because we're all students. We are all students. Every day I'm learning. I'm learning from when I'm flying. I'm learning from my first officers. They'll say, "Hey, let me show you something," and wow, geez, that's something down in the FMC that I've never seen, and we're all students. And as a DPE, I'm a student. I'm learning things every day, especially with I see applicants do things with some of the electronic flight bags with ForeFlights. Like, wow, how'd you do that? And they show me. But anyway, I'm going to start using that, and I think that's a great way to look at it, and I think it's a great way to approach the job. We're all students. So again, I've always said that I usually can tell when someone has some instructing experience, and a lot of people have the CFI and they've never really used it, and that's a huge difference, because we at my airline, I've seen some data that shows the best way to learn something is to teach something. And so what I have tried to impart to CFIs is maybe the best way to teach their student is to tell them, okay, tomorrow we're going to work on power off stalls. So what I want you to do tomorrow is I want you to come in and teach me. And this is a 10-hour student pilot coming in and teaching the CFI. Maybe that's the best way for that student to learn, is to actually come in and teach you how to do it in the briefing room, right. Obviously.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it was a powerful statement that we all picked up on. But I think being a student is maybe something that we can talk about in best practices later too. That they approach it, even being a CFI, as still being a continuing student, because there's no doubt we've probably all met a cocky CFI. We probably all flew with a cocky CFI, or the one that thought they knew it all. And the ones that are really, really great are the ones we're talking about now. They're still humble, 1,500 hours in, and know that they still have a lot to learn, which is probably what the recruiting department at major airlines are thinking about when they get to that point. Again, keeping these kind of in buckets, we're talking about I want to be a professional pilot one day. Any other early on advice beyond get your certificates, get your training, get your flight time, think about college, whether it's a 2-step or a 1-step process that you would tell an early on pilot that wants to be a professional pilot to be thinking about?
Life decisions matter, right? And whether it's excessive exposure on social media or just it's crazy. I have 4 kids that are all older, and I used to just tell them, what you're doing is going to make a difference somewhere else later. And none of them would believe me, but they all eventually in time have learned that I actually was correct. That late night party that turns into a public intox arrest, the drive home that turns into a DUI that you have to plead down to a wet reckless. There's just all kinds of things that we can do that can get ourselves in trouble. And when you have that obstacle to overcome, in addition to everything else, it becomes difficult. So just if that's your prize and if that's your goal and your objective is to become a professional pilot, realize that, and knock on wood, right, that the world watches you. Yep. And they look at you through a different lens. They really do. And I think they hold us to a different standard, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but you have to be aware that the standard is different.
Yeah, 40,000 feet in a steel cone with a bunch of people behind you is a big responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So higher standard, no question, and probably justifiable in every sense. I do think, I never thought I'd be sitting here at a flight school being a professional pilot myself. So maybe some of my college decisions weren't thinking about that, but the 18-year-old definitely that wants to be a professional pilot needs to be thinking about that. The 35-year-old, before they spend $100,000 maybe to get their 4-year degree and their professional pilot certificates, might need to look back and think, is there anything that's holding me back, right?
Right.
I know we'll take it offline, but there are some external services that could search your profiles on social medias and help you clean that stuff up. But that might be a real thing for some people. I know in corporate America, I did not make some hires because of what was on a MySpace page or a Facebook page that just would kind of show you the true colors of someone. And the recruiting departments at airlines are doing the same thing, I'm sure, looking at
some companies they are, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess what we all want, I think, when people have that professional pilot conversation, is the thing they need the most is an interview, right?
Right.
And whether they know that when they're sitting in my office talking about flight training or not, that's where they're going to start thinking at 1,000 hours, like how do I get to the table? And I think regionals is step one. We won't call it an associate's degree, but it's it's path one to a major airline, right?
Agreed.
So they got to get to the table at a regional first, and that might be a little easier today as we come out of this pandemic. Everyone's looking to hire, everyone's looking to beef up. The hours are going to be important, but showing value is going to be key, right? We talk about how do I get my resume to look better at 1,500 hours than the other 4,000 people that say 1,500 hours as well. What would be your advice for those CFIs, those cargo people, those whatever they are? They've got the time to get their ATP now, or maybe they have an ATP. How do I get to the table?
We have to go on the baseline that there's competition, right? So, and the competition can be 2, and I just got to beat out one other person, right? So before you get to the table, your entire persona is encapsulated on either an application or a resume, and that's it. The person making a decision on the other end has not met you, has never seen you, and doesn't know anything about you unless you have chosen to tell them that about you. And that's where the documentations are helpful. That's where the resume helps. That's where the application helps. You've got an opportunity to present yourself in a favorable light. And over the years, with the thousands and thousands of resumes and applications that I've looked at, some people excel in that area where others do not. And so we try and help people think differently. And one of the things that I talk about when I have a client that comes to us with a resume that's essentially blank, other than their name and their address and a very short list of where they've worked, is I always talk about transferable skills. And what's a transferable skill? What are you doing in your job right now that adds value to your employer and would be value added to a future employer? What did you do in your job before that that was a transferable skill? And it doesn't have to be a pilot skill, right? It can be a leadership skill. It can be a followership skill. It can be a communication skill. It can be a teaching skill. But how have you added value to where you are now, or perhaps where you've been? And how, as the person reading your document, am I picking up on, is that going to be value added to my company?
So people listen, and I just have a thought as I heard a tow bar, I think, crunch in the hangar there. What if I'm just a ramper and all I've ever done really is pull planes in and out? How am I going to share that value to a future employer like a regional airline?
And that's a fabulous question, Bobby. And there's a story that I tell from my early management days. I had a single direct report, and he was a ground instructor at my company, and he would call himself Justa. And he would come into my office, Charlie, I'm just a ground instructor. And my biggest challenge for him was to get him to realize that he wasn't just a ground instructor. Yep. He was the only guy in our building that knew about doors and emergency equipment and the CFRs that were related to that. He was the only guy that had subject matter expertise on a lot of different things. And he was a critical break point. And I needed to embrace the fact that he was much more than what he set himself out to be. On an org chart, sure, his position's down towards the bottom. But it's not about that. It's not where I am on the org chart. Even that guy on the bottom adds value. Your ramp guy is adding value. Hopefully you didn't ding the airplane, right? But but my point is that it's about perspective.
Well, and I try to teach them, unbeknownst to this conversation, that they are the customer service face to this organization. Whether the windshield's clean or not clean is part of their duties, but it changes the game when Wally gets in the plane to do a check ride and has a reflection moment on, is this a great place or not a great place? Are they preparing their aircraft the right way? Do I need to worry about where the oil's at right now? If the windshield's dirty, do I need to start worrying about the tires? It is a reflection. I had a breakup moment with my team arguing about a full trash can this week because it did not provide the Buc-ee's experience. And if you don't live in Texas, you probably don't know what Buc-ee's is, but they make billions of dollars a year for clean bathrooms, right? It's an experience thing. It's just a convenience store, but it's just a different experience than any other convenience store. And that's what I'm hoping to strive for here. And I think a ramper could say I was the janitorial lead along with the customer service representative, safety free for all 462 days of my time. And you could turn that quote unquote lowest square on an org chart into something that sounds like the most important person at the company, because quite frankly, they are, if they don't bend airplanes.
And I agree with you, with a caveat. And the caveat is anything that you choose to write on an application or a resume, consider it as fodder for the interview, right? So if I come in with and we're going to interview, I'm going to use, as the interviewer, I'm going to use your resume as a source of things to converse about. So if you write it, you must be able to sell it. And so so I'm 100% on board with you, but I want the asterisk on the end that says that
don't overdo it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Because I tell my clients all the time, write what you want to sell. Don't write what you can't sell. And it's also the other reason that we don't write for our clients. So when I engage with somebody, I don't put the words on paper for a client. I'll guide the client to the objective. And I tell them why. I'm like, listen, when it comes time, when you get the interview, I'm not there to sell it for you. And so if you're trying to sell what I wrote, you may or may not do well. But if you're going to sell what you wrote, you're always going to knock it out of the park.
Well, no question. I see where there's probably a lot of resumes out there with stretch marks on them where people might have bent that line a little bit from where they were. I've heard horror stories of just write out lies on resumes, right? We're not suggesting any of that. We're suggesting challenge your manager, challenge the people around you. If you don't know what value you provide, ask people, what value did I provide in the last 12 months?
Well, challenge
So you
yourself.
can
Look
put
in the
that-
mirror.
Yeah.
Right? Do I come to work and clock in and then clock out and go home? Or am I the instructor that says to a student, or when a student comes to me and says, Charlie, I'm struggling. I'm not understanding what it is that we're trying to do on this kind of approach. Am I the kind of instructor that says, don't worry about it, we'll talk about it tomorrow? Or am I the instructor that says, you know what, let's peel in, this briefing room over here is open. Let's go spend 15 minutes on it and see if I can get your brain wrapped around this so that tomorrow's flight's a little easier. Are you making the difference?
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a billable moment. It can be a professional moment.
What about other things as it relates to the resume, right? We've talked in the past about volunteerism. How do I volunteer? I think we both agree volunteering is important.
Right.
Find something you're passionate about. What about extra work around companies, the flight school, participating in a podcast maybe, whatever those things might be? Does that really start to add up, not just for conversational topics, but, hey, I'm going above and beyond?
Well, it adds up. Well, one, of course, it's something that you can talk about in an interview. But two, if you choose to do other things, you develop, like Wally was talking about earlier, you're a student. If I'm still continuing to soak things up and learn, all it does is make me a better professional. So if you're thinking to yourself, man, what can I do? I need something to write on a resume. Take a look around where you are right now. Where is there a need? Where is there a void? Where is there a niche? Where is there something that you have an interest in? The last thing you want to do is be the go-to person for something that you dread, right? Because we know what your performance is going to be like if you don't like doing what you're doing.
Yep.
It's going to be dreadful. It has to be something that you've got a little bit of interest in. We're not trying to kiss anyone's caboose. You're trying to develop yourself personally and professionally. And there are some tangible benefits to that development along the way.
Well, I have a very different history, but I've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years now. Wally was gracious enough to teach a free course at our flight school. I think we called it Overcoming Check Ride Anxiety.
Yeah.
Had never, which blew my mind as a corporate America guy, had never built a PowerPoint. And we worked through it. He built a PowerPoint. It was on his iPad, I think, pages or what is that, slides or something.
Yeah.
And he came in and we worked through getting it on the screen, and it was amazing. But even at his age, 30 years plus into a major airline job, you can learn things that don't necessarily apply to the major airline job and still give back to aviation, I think is the point, right?
Right.
And if he was a young man trying to get on with an airline, I bet he would talk about doing presentations for junior pilots and helping them overcome anxiety. And that would provide some conversational topic and some weight in that interview.
I totally agree.
And a pro at Pages or whatever the application might be.
Well, just you are not only a better pilot, but a better person, right? Because you've taken that opportunity to help somebody else, which I think is what the whole purpose behind the prop is, right?
I think so. So all good stuff so far. Let's try and put a bow on this episode and talk a little bit of best practices. Charlie, I hear it all the time from flight instructors, the students. They fail their private. I had just talked to them 4 months before, and they wanted to be a professional pilot. Now they failed that first check ride. They think they're doomed. They're done. They'll never get a job with an airline. How true is that? And what other things or urban legends that we could dismay with people today?
Training failures happen. It's an ego bruise when it does. I can relate personally. The issue is about patterns of behavior. So if you've had a private pilot failure and that's your first one and you've got to go redo it, take it as a learning moment, right? Reflect back and say to yourself, okay, now when I'm going to work on my instrument or my commercial, I know what my level of performance needs to be in the game. Am I ready for that game? And don't take the check ride until you're ready for the game. But it's what an airline would be looking for would be a pattern of failures. Right? If you failed your private, and then you failed your instrument, and then you failed your commercial, and then you failed your multi-engine, that's a rough start. That's going to be hard to recover from.
Yep.
Right? A single failure, even 2 failures, are not going to be difficult to recover from. but you got to own them. And you have to take ownership of that. No airline is looking for a perfect pilot, Bobby. One doesn't exist, right? Not even Wally. And so it's about, and the analogy that I like to use is it's never about the fumble. It's always about the recovery, right? You fumbled the ball. It's okay, right? You go to the sideline. Next time you come out on the field, they're going to give you the ball again. I promise you. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to be to the point where you choke and just say, oh my gosh, I can't believe they want me to do this again. I screwed it up so bad the last time. Or are you going to go for the end zone and get a touchdown? So you have to embrace the fact that all of training is a challenge, but you got to rise up to the occasion on it. So if you have a failure, it's okay. If you have two, that's okay. But you want to keep things from becoming habitual. And patterns of habitual behavior are generally not good indicators.
So let's jump to the resume. We talked a little bit about resumes in an earlier segment of this show. We talked about adding things. If I'm that ramper and I embellish all this greatness that I accomplished, and it becomes 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages. What's too much on a resume for an airline?
Industry standard is a 1-page document.
Okay.
You're lucky if anyone who's reading it spends more than 20 to 30 seconds going through the document.
How fancy does that document need to be? Does it need to have my picture and a bunch of swirls and
No.
clip art and
No.
pictures of me in a plane, all my solo pictures?
In fact, at the level of where I'm playing the game, at the major airline level, it should not include a picture at all. No airline can make a hiring decision based on age, ethnicity, race, gender, etc. So if you are showing me and you're playing that card, it's technically should not be in my field of view as a recruiter. So no, I would not include a photo on my resume. Please don't include the airline's logo on your resume. That's trademark and owned by the airline that you're applying to. Don't take their stuff and put it on your document. It's not yours to have. If you want to put their colors as a border, I'm okay with that, right? But if we're applying to FedEx, don't put a FedEx logo on your FedEx resume. It's bad form. Purple's a good color. You know, everyone gets what you're trying to do there, and you can be subliminal. I'm not trying to make all resumes for FedEx purple. But just think about 20 to 30 seconds. What do I want my audience to know? They got to know how to contact me, right? They got to know what my qualifications are. Do you meet the minimums? So that's going to be at the top of the document. How much time do I have? Is it applicable for the job? Do I have the ratings that I need to have this job? And then you're going to have, and I don't call it work experience. I call it professional experience, Bobby. Work's a job. We're talking about a profession, right? And this is something that I think all of us are into this because we got bit by the bug and we love to fly. So in my mind, things that are aviation wrapped around, this is about your profession, not your job. And so you go in and take, we're not writing an autobiography. We're talking about high-level nuggets of information, those transferable skills that you're ready to tell a story about. You're planting those seeds on a resume. And it's a 1-page document, right? Just think about it. 20 to 30 seconds. When somebody picks this up, it needs to be clear, it needs to be clean, it needs to be easy to read. No wingdings, no pictures, no fancy things. You know, if you're literally putting it on paper, it goes on a white, off-white, or a linen-colored paper, cream-colored linen paper. It doesn't have glitter. It doesn't have sparkles. It doesn't smell pretty.
Doesn't read like a tweet either, though, right? I mean, there's got to be some level of
Right.
professionalism. So, Comic Sans font versus another font, does that matter?
Well, font does matter, right? Size of the font, you know.
The same font, maybe.
Well, it should be the same font, right? Yeah, I've seen a lot of resumes with 3-4 different types of fonts, and then the font will vary. And we could have a whole podcast just on that. But presentation matters.
Right.
How do you look on paper? Because how you look on paper is going to preset my brain of how you're going to look when you're sitting in my office when I'm interviewing you.
Yeah, and I'm an ex-Microsoft guy, so when something's not indented the right way, like I see it, and I don't know if airline recruiters see it, but it just shows, to me, it shows a level of not caring almost. Like, I don't care that this is out of whack.
It's attention to detail too, right? And my first client that I have this afternoon, I've got to coach him that he used his wife's name on his document.
Oops.
That's an autofill mistake, right? So take the time to proofread your work.
Yep. Yep. Wally, I've spent most of the show talking to Charlie. What final thoughts do you have? I know you have children that want to be professional pilots one day, and I'm sure you've been a big mentor to them. What's your guidance to them? And I guess to that point, I'll ask you, but you be thinking about it, Charlie. What about acronyms on those resumes? Have you proofed your own daughter's resume, and do you have a thought on acronyms and how many acronyms they have versus real words? I think that we get caught up in this. We've said ATP a dozen times, and the person that walks in this room and wants to be a professional pilot, they have no idea what that stands for, right? So does that matter in aviation and recruiting and hiring, and what are your thoughts on that?
I'll let Charlie speak to that, but I would say I would want the resume because not only is a pilot going to be reviewing this resume, but someone who's working in HR is going to be reviewing the resume. Of course, they're going to be working for an airline, so they're going to know things like ATP and everything. But there could be some aviation acronyms that get down in the weeds. As professional airline pilots, when we're doing a PA to the people in the back, we try to, if we're telling what the weather is at our destination, we don't say it's 600 broken. It's mostly cloudy skies. That's right. What the person wants to know. We don't give them, if I'm flying domestically, I don't give them the temperature in centigrade. I give it to them in Fahrenheit. So I want them to know what the weather is. Partly cloudy skies, 82 degrees is what they want to know. Right. I would, on the surface, I would think you would want to stay away from a lot of the some of the acronyms. I don't know, Charlie. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
I think I'm trying to think with the level I'm 18 or I'm applying to my first regional job. There wouldn't be a lot of those.
Okay.
And most of the ones that you, like ATP, for example, right? If I were putting that on a resume, I would spell out airline transport pilot, but then I would put AMEL at the end, right? Or you could just, we're handcuffed by real estate on a resume.
Sure, yeah.
And
one page is tough if you have no acronyms.
Right. If you spell everything, then we could run into that trouble. So there are widely accepted things with that. But and in my brain, I'm racking through things that I would expect to have seen on a resume from someone that's a flight instructor, and I don't see it rich in acronym. If you're getting to the point where you're talking about types of approaches, and that's minutia data.
CFI, CFII, MEO.
It seems to me,
very
Charlie,
normal.
Very normal.
Charlie, it seems to me there was something on my daughter's resume that she had a CFI or CFII with a gold seal, and how she had it worded. You suggested something a little bit differently. I don't recall the exact details.
I don't either, Wally.
Okay.
But words could matter, and the way that we present ourselves is, I think, the bigger key. Acronyms sound to be okay, probably not to where it sounds like you're speaking in tongues, but be smart. Ask another pilot to review it. Maybe ask someone in aviation that not in aviation that doesn't understand all those to review it, and does it read and make enough sense to present to someone.
Well, and part of it too, the flip side to keep in check with that is that your audience, you're not applying to a position that's not aviation, likely, right? You got to know your audience.
Right.
If I'm going to ask for a flight instructor job with you, you're going to understand if I use some acronyms on my document. Now, if I'm going to go and apply for a job as an engineer somewhere in a different field, then I'm probably going to tailor my document in a different way.
Makes a lot of sense. So I guess the last question that I have, and I'm so glad, I think we're all glad that we're making this turn from being a little scared of what COVID's going to do to the aviation industry to where we're at today. And I think rewind 18 months ago, everyone was hiring. It feels like we're almost back there already. You sound busier than you've ever been before with both your airline job and your aviation business, Checked and Set. What should people that are right at that 1,500 hour mark be doing today? Should they be waiting to pick the right airlines? I hear people that are saying, I can't wait. Maybe they're going to be signing bonuses soon. Is seniority the key thing? What would be your guidance to my flight instructor who has 1,499 hours and they want to go to work as an airline pilot? They want to be at a major one day. Is it take the first job I can get? Is it How do you think of that, I guess, is my closing question for you, Charlie.
If you wait until you're sure, the opportunity is going to be gone. So I'm not saying take the first thing that comes down your road. But to try and outgame what you think might happen. I mean, heck, just look at the period of time that we've been doing with COVID, right? Who could have predicted with any degree of certainty what was going to happen over the course of the last 18 months?
It's
Nobody.
been crazy.
Nobody. So who, with any degree of certainty, can forecast the next 18 months and say
Right.
what's going to happen? You can't. There's so many different things. And then, and Wally, well, the three of us have all been around in this crazy business for as long as we have and have seen every evolution of good, bad, and indifferent. And what I always tell people is you got to make the right decision for you, right? So, and if that means that you have to have the signing bonus, well, then you can wait. If that means that you want to go on and start building your flight time because you realize that seniority makes a difference, and it absolutely does, then that's the right thing. But the other part of this too, in my world, is it's about the right job. And just let me kind of give you an example. I've worked with clients that have taken the wrong job. And I don't mean that it was a good job, right? Paid well, flew a nice shiny jet, but they were absolutely miserable doing that job. And when you are miserable and you are browbeaten and when you don't like what you're doing, even though you love flying airplanes, well, you ooze that miserableness. Mm-hmm. And when you get to an interview, you run the potential of oozing how miserable you are in your job, and it doesn't sell well. So, but if you're happy where you're flying, and maybe you're not making as much money, and maybe the airplane isn't as shiny and isn't as fast and isn't as cool, but you genuinely love what you do, that transmits.
Yep, it does. Wally, I'll close with you with a comment we actually had yesterday in a side conversation. What's the best airline to work for?
The best airline to work for is the one that hires you.
And that's something that I think probably pilots of your era would believe, because it was much, much more difficult back in those days. We just went through a flip-flop of, I get to 1,500, I'm going to get a job, to I might need to get 4,000 before I get a job, to we're back to this number. It looks closer to 1,500, but I do think there is this value to being a professional pilot at a regional airline that's going to pay dividends to everyone that asks that question. And they should take the one that's probably there sooner than later, unless it includes misery, for sure. Well, with that, Charlie, we really can't thank you enough for joining the show. Again, his company is CheckedAndSet.net, and we hope you all become professional pilots if that's the goal you're seeking for. Fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.